Okay.
Hello, everybody. Yes, we are recording. Welcome back to our Bible study. Last week, apologies that I did not record that, but last week we talked about the prophetic literature in the Hebrew scriptures. And so, what that includes are the prophets. And we looked at the prophets' use of this word ra, this Hebrew word ra that we've been sort of tracking in our conversations. This word that in Hebrew has a lot of different meanings. And so, as it makes its way into English and through translation, we actually use a variety of different words to translate those different meanings based on context. And so, in some contexts, translators will interpret the word raw as referring to the English concept of evil, as in the garden or the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The word used there is ra for evil. But also, Ra can be translated as pestilence, as plague, as calamity, as misfortune, as a whole variety of things. And so we're moving from the prophet's idea that the calamity that the Israelites have endured is a direct result from their failing to uphold God's laws. We're moving from this idea that we might call retributive, this idea that God's wrath is retribution for punishment for wrongdoing, to a different idea that's also in the Hebrew Bible. A move away from the idea that calamity, suffering is inherently punishment and might just happen. And so we're going to look at beginning with the the story of Job. And so just a moment ago, I asked each of you to name a consolation, something that's been bringing you joy, something that has felt relieving, something that has consoled you, and also to name something that has felt desolating, something that has felt difficult, something that has felt not so happy, and maybe even felt as though it was draining life from you. Now, as you think about, if you're watching this recording, if you do that same kind of exercise, thinking specifically about whatever you might name as desolating, depending on your perspective, you could come up with a lot of reasons as to why that desolating thing has taken place. Also, obviously, it will depend on what the desolating thing is. If you're naming a particular kind of misfortune that you may be enduring right now, some sort of physical suffering, some sort of global or political or national suffering, some sort of just deeply personal suffering, you might have a whole variety of ways to think about why that thing is happening. In the story of Job, we encounter a person who um, is experiencing essentially every conceivable kind of suffering there is. Job's family is taken away from him. Job's physical health is taken away from him. Job's wealth is taken away from him. And for most of the story throughout Job, we see this character trying to figure out why. Why has this happened? And what he doesn't know is something that we learn as readers right at the beginning of the story, is that the reason all of this has happened is because of no one other than Satan. This is Church Chat Lady from SNL. If you watched SNL back in the late 80s, early 90s, Church Chat Lady may have been one of your favorite recurring characters. And so, Satan, that's who causes all of this to happen to Job. But the way that happens is kind of interesting and a little bit unexpected. So let's look at the passages from Job where we get the stories set up. There once was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold feasts in one another's houses in turn, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the feast days had run their course, Job would send and sanctify them. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This is what Job always did. Looking at this passage, let's just pause here for a second. Couple of quick things. We have this moment here at the very beginning. In verse 1, there was once a man in the land of Uz. What does that mean? Well, no one really knows. The land of Uz, it doesn't refer to an actual place. It doesn't that scholars can figure out. Essentially, what people tend to see this as basically saying, there once was a man in a faraway land. The land of Uz is sort of meaningless, almost. And so what we know, though, is that the land of Uz is not Israel. So this is not taking place in the land of Israel. This is in a different place, a foreign place. So, what else sticks out to you about this, from this passage here, if anything, about Job?
He was blameless.
Blameless. Yeah. This is another way of saying perfect, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost written like a fairy tale. Once
I was
upon a
saying
time.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. It has that kind of character, doesn't it? Yeah. Once upon a time, there was a man in a faraway place who was perfect. Yeah. And, sorry, Fran, you're muted. What do you think?
He was consistent.
He was very consistent, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, very consistent. And he was actually so perfect that if you notice here in verse 5, Job would actually rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings on behalf of his children just in case they might have
Yes.
sinned. He didn't even know if they did for real, just in case.
Yeah.
He covered the bases for them. Okay,
That,
anything
that
else?
was that was like your grandmama praying for you.
Absolutely. Yes. Because she
Yeah,
knows you might be up to no good. So
that's
she's going to
right.
go ahead and cover the bases for you. All right, let's move on to the next section here. One day, the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser also came among them. The Lord said to the accuser, "Where have you come from?" The accuser answered the Lord, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." The Lord said to the accuser, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Then the accuser answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a fence around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." The Lord said to the accuser, "Very well, all that he has is now in your power. Only do not stretch out your hand against him." So the accuser went out from the presence of the Lord. What are you seeing in this passage here now?
The Lord has faith in Job.
Yeah, the Lord has faith in Job. Absolutely.
But he also can be baited.
Yeah, right. There's this accuser who comes. God is sort of boasting,
Yes,
right? The
yes.
accuser has come back from walking the earth, and God's like, well, hey, did you happen to see Job? He's so great. Look at everything that he does. He's blameless and upright, and he has awe of me. He fears me. That's the kind of fear we're talking about there. He sits in awe of my presence and my being. And then the accuser says, well, I mean, he's kind of got everything going for him. Of course he does all that. But I bet if you made it hard for him, he'd curse you to your face, even. So, the word Satan is a Hebrew word, and it actually shows up in this text. Any ideas as to what English word we're looking at that might actually in Hebrew be Satan?
The accuser.
Jesus.
Accuser! Exactly. And so in Hebrew, Hasatan means the accuser. And in the Israelite royal court, the king was surrounded by a whole variety of advisors. And part of the function of those advisors was to help the king root out disloyalty. And so the Satan, that in some English translations is preserved, we're not though talking about a particular character. In this instance, we're talking about a person in a role, a cosmic being that sits in a role, one of the heavenly beings that came to present themselves before the Lord. This one, this accuser, just happens to say to God, actually, you might not be this person, Job, that you singled out as being upright and loyal to you, might not be as loyal as you think. And so what we see here is, in a way, a bet that takes place. Whereas the accuser, Hasatan in Hebrew, says to God, yeah, I bet if you took all that stuff away from Job, he probably wouldn't, he would curse you to your face, in fact. And so this is the setup for the whole story. A setup that Job has no idea about. Any thoughts or reactions to this piece of Job's story? We get a really different picture of why bad things happen to people, why raw. This word from Hebrew that gets translated as evil, calamity, pestilence, plague. This is a really different idea about why this happens. We're not in the realm of retribution. We're not in the realm of punishments. We're in the realm of cosmic wagers that this person just happened to get caught up in.
But the Lord said to the accuser, I mean, he set that up. The Lord did.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
it's very well, then all that he has is in the accuser's power. Right?
I think that's a great way of looking at it, Joy, and that in a way, I think it was Carla maybe who said that that God is baited into this, right? If you look at verses 9 and 10, the accuser says to the Lord, "Does Job hold God in awe for nothing, just 'cause? No, you've built this nice little life for him where he has thousands of sheep and camels and oxen and children and all the rest of it." And so God says, all right then, well, I'll give him over to you.
Right.
You can do to him what you want. Just don't stretch your hand against him, which I think we can read as a variety of things. One thing is just don't kill him. Everything else is fair game. And so the accuser, Hasatan, then takes Job everything away from Job until Job is lying in a dung pile covered in boils and just crying out. So let's take a little bit of a tangent here to talk about how we get from Hasatan, this member of the divine court, one of the heavenly beings, how we move from that idea of Satan to capital S, Satan. We begin with Hasatan, here Satan as prosecutor. And Satan as the accuser, as the adversary. Those are other ways that Hasatan is translated. And then we actually, and so by the way, even though Job comes later in the biblical canon, the flow of books, many people date Job to have happened to be written down, a collection of stories that were formed before the prophets. And apparently, according to Jewish tradition, Moses wrote the Torah and the book of Job.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we then find later is people piecing together other elements from other places in the Bible that eventually gets turned into the red-winged, horned tail, pitchfork Satan that many of us may know. Yeah, Fran.
I have a question, and maybe I know the answer to it, but I'm not sure. So, who actually took all these things away from Job? Was it God or was it the accuser?
Yeah, this was the way I read that is that it's the accuser.
So, God allowed the accuser to, okay.
Exactly. Yeah. God said to the accuser, go ahead and do what you will, just don't kill him, but everything else is fair game.
Okay.
And so, and this is all to prove a cosmic point. Basically, they're trying to see whether or not Job will break down and curse God. And meanwhile, again, we're still talking about a being that is in God's court. That's part of the whole heavenly crew. Eventually, though, we see Satan turn into something else. And part of that begins with the book of Isaiah. In the book of Isaiah, we read, "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn." And so in the book of Isaiah, we have this star that's fallen, son of the dawn. What Christians later read in that was a reference to Satan. And so the way that this "O morning star" gets translated from Hebrew into Latin is that rather than translate "O morning star" literally, St. Jerome, who's the person who translated this into Vulgate Latin, the more common Latin, decided to kind of take the poetic sense of what that was referring to and translated it as light bearer, which in Latin is Lucifer. And so what was originally being referred to in the book of Isaiah, though, was almost certainly the king of Babylon. So we're seeing this move away from Israel as a nation that has a defined boundary and a kingdom, to Israel being taken over, conquered, destroyed by empire after empire after empire, beginning with the Babylonians. And so in Isaiah, what many people translate that to have meant in its original context was "how you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn," a reference to the king of Babylon, specifically using the metaphor of the star of Venus, the planet Venus. which appears as a star in the twilight. And then when the sun comes along, what happens? It disappears. And so what Isaiah is doing is referring to the king of Babylon as Venus, as this what appears to be a star in the sky that's the brightest star in all the sky until the sun comes along, until God comes along and wipes it out, makes it fall, if you will. And so we have this kind of poetic, prophetic usage of this term, morning star, that makes its way into Latin as Lucifer, that then begins to gather more and more content as time passes, as we move into the Second Temple period. Now, this is a period that's about 500 years. And so what happens in this time is that when the Babylonians conquer Jerusalem, they destroy the temple, the center of gravity for all of Judaism, for all of the Israelites. They destroy it completely, and they capture a bunch of Israelites and take them back to Babylon. Others are scattered around that area. And eventually, after another empire comes and takes over the Babylonians, the Persians come. The Persians say, okay, Israelites, you guys can go back to where you were. You can go back to the land of Israel. And they begin to build another temple. As soon as they can, they build another temple, the Second Temple. Fast forward to around 70 CE, and the Romans eventually destroy the temple again, but for about 500 years, there's a group of people here who have been influenced by all of these different, basically colonists, imperial presences that have given to the Israelites their own cultural norms. And so you can actually see in some of the Hebrew Bible, there are loan words from Persian, there are loan words from Egyptian, there are loan words from other cultures that have occupied the land of Israel, or that the Israelites were influenced by through conquest. And so what begins to happen is that this strictly monotheistic culture begins to be influenced by these other imperial cultures that have a very different worldview. In the Persian worldview, there isn't just a single entity. There's a dualistic quality to the cosmos. There's light and there's dark. There's good and there's evil, and there's a God in charge of both. And so the idea is that over time, Judaism, the religion of the Israelites, begins to get more and more influenced by the idea that the world is split into good and bad, right and wrong, God and Satan. Still, in the Israelite context, these are not co-equal forces. God is still reigns supreme. And so we get more and more of an idea of Hasatan, Satan, Lucifer later, Satan as a fallen angel. And so we begin to see in some of the apocalyptic literature of this time, this idea that there will be this cosmic battle between good and evil, and God, good, will prevail. And all of these influences are at work in the land that Jesus grew up in Judea, in Galilee, in all the places that he traveled to. There's this idea of Satan, not just as the accuser from Job, but this idea of Satan that's transformed into this cosmic being that is an enemy, that has gravity and power and influence in the world. And so we move from Hasatan, the accuser, to these other formulations of Satan in the New Testament. So take a look at some of these quick passages from the New Testament. Before we get there, though, I'm just curious, how is Satan talked about? What are the ideas of Satan that you have inherited or believe have been given? Who's Satan? What's Satan do? Where's Satan live? What's Satan look like? What's Satan do in the world?
I guess it wasn't until I got older that I thought of Satan as a spirit of, bad, of bad things, just that he or she existed, you know.
Hmm. Yeah. So this personified entity that does bad things, causes bad things to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about other folks? How was Satan talked about to you as a child, if at all?
It was a joke.
Yeah.
It was not, Satan made me do it kind of a thing. I mean, it wasn't real. It was just someone to blame other than yourself.
Okay. And yeah, that is a turn of phrase.
Right,
Satan was an expression.
right.
It's just
That's
the
all it
devil
was.
made me do it.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks, Joy.
I don't remember. My religious upbringing was pretty uh, sketchy and bland and didn't really have a big effect. I mean, I think I just wasn't paying a lot of attention. But anyway, I don't think I ever remember them talking about the devil. That just wasn't part of the deal. So my image or whatever I think or know is very comic book like, just whatever images and thoughts come from popular culture almost, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, a lot of what we conceptualize as Satan, because I imagine that probably each of us has a picture of the devil or Satan in our minds. If I just use that term, I bet something comes into your brain. And a lot of those images don't come directly from the Bible, they come from John Milton and his book Paradise Lost. They come from Dante and Dante's book, The Divine Comedy. They come from a variety of artists, visual artists, who've taken those ideas and visualized them. And so, what we see though in the New Testament looks like this. Let's see. Here in 2 Corinthians, Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth, Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. In Luke, Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven when talking to the disciples. Then in the Gospel according to Matthew, and this is the setup for the holy season that we are in right now, Lent. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And so, what we get in the New Testament is that we've moved from Hasatan, this accuser that's part of the heavenly court of God, to a personified entity that is evil, that is not just accusing and testing to see what happens, but in fact trying to tempt people to do bad stuff. Certainly, this was the case for Jesus. And so we have this shift in worldview, where now Satan is not just part of the heavenly beings, Hasatan, part of the heavenly beings, an accuser, but is actually a malevolent force that has power and gravity and is attempting to throw Christians, followers of Jesus, off course. And so by the time we get to folks like Augustine, the theologian and early Christian bishop, Augustine, who gave us this term that we talked about in our first session, privatio boni, thinking of evil not as a presence, not as a substance, but as an absence, a complete absence of good, a privation of good. We get Augustine, who gives us the more fully formed idea that Satan is a fallen angel who causes evil in the world. The way we get there, though, takes about 700 years. And then we have people who take those ideas that begin to be preached in churches about Satan and Satan's role and Satan's force and Satan's influence in the world and begin to develop literature and visual art and a whole variety of things. And now we end up with Satan as this thing you can sometimes dress up as on Halloween. This creature, this entity that has a pointy tail and wings and horns. Some of which comes from the book of Revelations, where there's a dragon that comes as the embodiment of the cosmic force that fights God in the final battle. But this is a far cry from where we are in Job. So going back to Job, what we have is this force, this cosmic being, this heavenly entity that says to God, hey God, this person Job that you've been boasting about, I bet he'll curse your name if you take away all the good stuff he's got. And there's a moment in Job where all of this comes to a head. So this is a painting by William Blake, who actually created a whole illustrated series based on the book of Job. And so what we see here, well, you tell me, when you look at this, what's going on? What are you seeing? Let's just build a little visual data bank.
Well, is that Job's wife in the back?
We've got a person back here, and
He looks very worried.
Yeah, people have debated who that person might be because it's not exactly clear. But yeah, this person looks distressed, right? And then we have Job here, right? We've got this person on his knees looking up towards God, and you might not be able to see it especially well, but if you notice his skin is full of pockmarks. Probably a representation of the boils that the accuser gave him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what else do you see?
Well, he looks like he's sorry.
He certainly, I mean, look at those eyes. And those are either boils or tears coming out of his eyes. Yeah. What else do you notice?
Why are there three accusers? Or three?
Yeah, we've got these three people here.
Those are the three friends that were in Job, Bob, and all the others, that are in fact accusing Job of, having done wrong. And
Right.
they continue to do that until the last one, who may be the one on the left, then comes in and says, no, that's not right. And then, of course, God comes. But the three friends, and most of the spells of talking, are the friends accusing Job of having, in fact, done wrong when he had, in fact, not. And that continues through 90% of Job, until Elihu, or whatever his name was, says, no, that's not true, and then God, of course, shows up and says, who are you to ask me anything? which was not a great answer either.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, Job has these three friends that are kind of accompanying him along this terrible journey, and they spend a lot of time together, actually in silence, just being there with him as he suffers. But eventually, they start to accuse him, as you put it, Joe. They start to say, well, Job, God doesn't really cause suffering for the righteous. God doesn't really make bad things happen to good people. So what do you think? And so you have these friends who are still operating in this worldview that says suffering is punishment.
Mm.
And Job saying, listen, no, that's not what happened. And Job begins to lose it a little bit. And then that's when God comes in and says, who are you to question? Were you there when I created the whole universe? And it starts to seem like God's maybe about to get shown up a little bit. It doesn't seem like Job's going to curse God, but Job's beginning to lose his patience a little bit. And so after his friends really start to accuse him of having done wrong. And so again, we have this moment in Job where these two worldviews kind of come colliding one into the other. The idea that suffering, raw, that form of evil, that kind of calamity is a result of raw, moral evil. And then we still have this guiltless, blameless person, Job, who's just suffering. And so this is a segue, in fact, to our conversation about the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes is, there's lots of ways to describe what it is. Anybody have some ideas about Ecclesiastes that they've either from reading the book or just hearing it talked about? What do you come to this conversation with already knowing about Ecclesiastes, if anything?
I know the bird song, turn, turn, turn.
Yes, there it is. Yes. And that when there's those lines, a time to blah, 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 that's all I know, a time. And so, but in those lyrics, that's inspired by Ecclesiastes, because Ecclesiastes talks about there being a time for everything. There's a season for everything. There's a time to die, a time to live, a time for war, and a time for peace. There's this kind of serene sense that there's a season for every kind of experience. Yeah. There's another passage, a quote from Ecclesiastes that is very widely known among some. There is nothing new under the sun. That's become almost a proverb in English that comes from Ecclesiastes. And so Ecclesiastes is, in terms of the way it's set up, one of the most, in my view, interesting books of the Bible because it's so different. It's written in the first person, meaning that the pronoun I shows up constantly, and there's this, it's written by, or said to be written by, this person, Koheleth, which is Hebrew for preacher or community leader, or it's sort of a general term. And so the other title for Ecclesiastes is Koheleth. And so Ecclesiastes is actually the Greek translation of the Hebrew word Koheleth, and refers to this person who is basically written what is almost like a memoir, and is going through all of these different ideas that this person has learned and accumulated in their own lifetime. And so when we read things like there is a season for all things, what we're reading is Koheleth just sharing some wisdom. When we read, there is nothing new under the sun, what we are reading is Koheleth's wisdom. And so I want to turn our attention to this particular passage from Ecclesiastes. This is chapter 8, verses 13 through 15. But evil people do evil and never repent, while the righteous see the end of those who fear God. There is futility that takes place on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. I said that this also is futility. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there is nothing better for people under the sun than to eat and drink, and to enjoy themselves in their toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God.
It's comforting.
Yeah, can you say more about that, Joy? What about it feels comforting to you?
It's comforting. I can't explain it, but things will happen,
Yeah.
but you find comfort in life. I mean, that, okay, it happened, but we still are blessed with this life that God has given us. Um, I find that comforting.
Yeah. Yeah, I commend the enjoyment of life because there's nothing better for people under the sun than to eat and drink and to enjoy themselves even in their toil. Yeah.
I, on the other hand, see that as very uncomfortable because it basically says that living here on the earth, we aren't going to get what's good because we're good. The evil are more likely than we are because they're smarter than we are to get the good stuff, and we're going to get what's left over. So we might as well just live the best we can live. So it's not terribly comforting to me to know, and it is in fact that the wicked often get what we deserve, and we often don't get what we should get, and that's just reality. That's not comforting to me.
Mhm. Yeah, we're in a different world, aren't we, than the world of the prophets, where there's this description that you will get your just deserts and that punishment will happen to those who are evil. Yeah, Koheleth is saying
But we don't have any control over it.
that's what Koheleth is saying exactly. And this is what I'm hearing you name, Joe, is uncomfortable, is that there's no way to predict what will happen. Just because you've done good stuff doesn't mean good things will happen to you. And
Right.
just because you've done bad stuff doesn't mean bad things will happen to you. Yeah, this is a whole different worldview, a whole different take on the importance of not being evil. Because one of the biggest sales pitches for not being evil, for doing good, is that you'll be rewarded in one way or another. And Koheleth is saying, yeah, no, that's not actually true. Anything else stick out to y'all about this particular passage?
The fact that he's said to enjoy themselves in their toil. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming that, okay, we're supposed to enjoy ourselves at work. And, to me, it's all about simplicity.
Mm.
You know, just eat and drink and be merry.
The
That is
first
basically what Koheleth recommends. Eat, drink, and be merry.
And that's
first
simple. Because, to me, that's like, oh, this is it.
Yeah.
the first line is very important there because it says evil people do evil and
Never
never
repent.
repent.
Right.
That's a very important part because we all do evil, you know,
Right.
but truly evil people do evil and are not sorry for it. I think of everything you read there, that perhaps is the most important statement there.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that in that way, Joe, that he qualifies the difference between just doing evil and being an evil person, is that evil people do evil and never repent. And still, going back to that other point that you were naming that makes you feel uncomfortable, that's really a setup to say it's all futile.
Yeah.
So because the wicked get what the good deserve, the righteous deserve, and the righteous get what the wicked deserve. And so again, he just comes back to this idea: I commend the enjoyment of life. And so what we're going to see when next week we turn more explicitly to the teachings of Jesus and thinking about evil and how it shows up in the New Testament and in the teachings of Jesus. What I'm going to suggest to you now is that what we'll see is sort of a blending of both of these strains. We will have Jesus talking about Satan and the influence of Satan and the reality of this evil in the world. While at the same time, we'll see Jesus say things like God makes it rain on the righteous and the unrighteous alike.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see Jesus kind of blending these two perspectives on evil and on punishment. And we'll be left to really do some discernment work on our own. Because the Bible, of the various ways that we've talked about evil, whether it's a substance and a reality, or whether it's a lack of good, evil as something that we can make decisions about and control. When we're thinking of evil in the register of nature and punishment and calamity. And then there's evil in the sense that it just happens to us. There's the idea that bad things happen to bad things and good things happen to good people. And then there's the idea that we see from Koheleth where it's all futile, so you might as well just eat and drink and be merry.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah.
And so what's really interesting is that for me is that the Bible offers this kind of smorgasbord, if you will, of possibilities for ways to understand these ideas, because the Bible's a record, a compendium of all these different snapshots from these different moments in people's endeavor to make life with God, to make meaning in a world of chaos. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole variety of strategies that people have used to do this. Some are more oriented around control and predictability. Others are more oriented around enjoying what we can and the reality that suffering is inevitable. We have access to all of these different perspectives and can go deeper into any one of them. And so when we get to the teachings of Jesus, what we'll be presented with is a person who's kind of blending these ideas in a whole variety of ways. And we'll look at some of the ways that he does that. Any last questions or comments before we bring tonight to a close?
I have a cartoon to share. I don't know if it'll work, but let's see if it does.
Yeah.
Uh,
New
let's
Yorker.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
Well,
What
what does the word say?
Okay, it says,
Move it
You
over a
didn't get it
little.
all in there.
oh, wait, okay. I was going to read the words
Move
because,
it.
Oh,
Move it.
wait, I can't, I have to cover up what I'm doing to see.
live
We can
by.
see it looks like a person on a cloud.
Yeah, that's what it
Like
looks like.
God, maybe? Like God?
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. God looking at the earth, maybe.
Yeah. And God is saying, let life be fair for 10 minutes. He's commanding. Commanding it to be.
Thanks, God.
10 minutes.
Wonder if those 10 minutes have happened already.
I
Well, I know
know.
I was
Go.
stuck in the restroom then.
Yeah, right. Oh, Lord.
Pastor, when you said what image do we have of the devil? I don't know if anyone remembered, but there was a comic book about the little red devil.
Oh
Did
yeah,
you remember that, Carla? He was a
I
that's what comes
do.
to mind. He looked like Cubit, but he was just red with his, tail and his horns.
He
And
was little.
well, yeah, what was the name of that cartoon?
I
It
don't
was
know.
a comic book. He had a whole little book. Yeah. Huh. I
Well,
gotta
I
look
get
And
that
used
that
to
up.
those old Warner Brothers cartoons where there would be an angel appear on one shoulder and a
Yeah,
devil,
on the
some
other.
demon would appear on the other, and you had
Yeah.
to figure out which one you're listening. Yeah.
yeah. I did have a question, a literary question though. Wasn't the Greek god's name for the sun Ra?
The Egyptian.
Egypt,
Egyptian, yeah.
Yeah, the Egyptian's god,
Yep,
the Egyptian god's name was
That's
Ra.
right.
Yeah.
Ra. Spelled the same way?
Well, they're different scripts, but I assume they were pronounced similarly. Egyptian hieroglyphics and Hebrew letters would have looked different. And I don't know in the case of the Egyptian hieroglyphics if there was a one-to-one ratio with letters, or if those symbols, just like in Chinese, a symbol means a word.
Something.
But it's interesting to think about, given the connections between those two cultures.
Mm.
Yeah, that's something that we can look at. Well, friends, thank y'all so much for another good conversation.
Yes.
we found hot stuff.
Hot stuff. That was
Hot
his name.
stuff.
Yeah.
This is
Oh,
this is
thank
the
you, Carla.
theology. This was the theology I was brought up with.
Yeah, that's what I saw.
Comes from all kinds of places.
Yeah, hot stuff. That was his
Thank
name.
you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
y'all.
Pastor.
Next class, by the way, will be our last one, and
Okay.
we'll do a little bit of bringing things together. And next week, I'll also talk a little bit about what I think we'll do in the Easter season as we get
Okay.
closer to that in terms of a class.
All
So
right.
thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye
Good night.
bye.
Bye-bye.